all deficits have negative consequences. However, at certain times, deficit spending is justified. It is reasonable for the government to spend beyond collective revenue in order to cope with emergencies and ensure the well-being of the country. The determination of whether or not the use of deficit spending would be justified depends upon an evaluation of the situation at the time the deficit or deficits would be incurred, and the likely condition of the country once the need for deficit spending was passed. For example, the deficits generated between 1917 and 1919 would be considered as justified. Spending far beyond revenue was reasonable. The decision to finance the efforts of the United States and its allies during World War I was rational and realistic. The deficits were necessary because expenditures of such magnitude could not be funded in any other way. The United States entered the war to help the Allies, democracies which were its main trading partners, defeat the authoritarian governments of the Central Powers. The U.S. also wanted to ensure the freedom of the seas in response to the German submarine warfare. And the United States opposed the German actions exposed in the Zimmermann Message, which violated the Monroe Doctrine and threatened American territory and independence. The money from the deficits was focused on the war effort in the attempt to accomplish these goals. Victory would leave the country in a better economic and diplomatic as well as military condition. The nation would then be likely to pay down the debt caused by the deficits. Therefore, deficits which are necessary and reasonable, focused on an emergency or specific goal, and likely to enhance the future, making repayment of the debt created by the deficit more likely, are acceptable, justified deficits. Likewise, the deficits of the 1930s were also justified. With the stock market crash, the economy descended into a depression. Factories closed. Unemployment soared. Many people were homeless. Many were hungry. There was widespread despair. Government revenue, reduced by the depressed economy, was inadequate to finance the efforts necessary to combat the effects of the Great Depression and begin the process of economic recovery. Deficit spending financed an assortment of programs to provide relief for the suffering, jobs for the unemployed, and stimulus for the economy. The money supply expanded, employment increased. The economy improved, dipping only when deficit spending was briefly decreased. The deficits of the New Deal not only rescued the economy from total collapse, but also confronted catastrophic suffering, prepared the country for its next challenges, and left a legacy of modern infrastructure, public parks and buildings, and a renewed spirit. The deficits of World War II would also be considered justified. Spending beyond the collected revenue was necessary, reasonable, and focused. The spending enabled the United States and its allies to defeat fascism and ensure the survival of European and American democracies. The nation emerged from the war much stronger than had Germany, Italy, and Japan been allowed to expand, much stronger than had the Axis powers prevailed militarily, much stronger than it had entered the conflict. Deficits can also be justified in less extreme situations. It is reasonable for an individual to borrow to finance college or professional training in order to get a better job. It is reasonable for a business to borrow in order to expand. So too, it is reasonable for governments in some situations to borrow to improve the country's infrastructure in order to promote long-term growth. The borrowing in these private and public situations is justified because the deficits finance improvements which make future repayment likely. Repayment is also likely and deficits are also justified when government borrows in response to a natural disaster in order to provide relief and reconstruction or stimulate the economy during a recession. Therefore, in spite of the many negative aspects of deficit spending, there are times when deficits are not only justified, but also good policy.